Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got...
Hey, everybody. That was the fantastic Pete Seeger singing with Dar Williams and David Burns, the Solartopia song. We are back for another hour here at the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show. We have been doing for the past year or so mostly our grassroots emergency election protection coalition Zooms, but we got a couple weeks off, and we are going to be doing today another show on nuclear power and renewable energy. We are going to do the first half hour with the great Linda Pence Gunter, who's with us. I assume you're in Silver Springs, or one of those leftist suburbs of Washington, D.C. And then we're going to be joined by TATONKA BRICCA and Ron Leonard at the half hour to talk about renewable energy. So we got a ton to talk about. Linda is truly one of the great activists that I've ever met. She's a fantastic organizer, and actually covered tennis and professionally. And if I had my way, we could talk for the next half hour about that moron Novak Djokovic, who got booted from Australia and can't play in the Australian Open. Another anti-vaxxer, I guess. And I would talk also with you about the imminent retirement, apparently, of two of our greatest champions. As far as I'm concerned, two of the greatest people in all of the history of professional sport, Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal. They both seem on the brink of retirement, but they have been truly great champions. Linda, did you ever get a chance to meet any of those guys?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, sounds like you probably know more about tennis now than I do, because I don't watch it anymore very much. I'm a bit of a sort of armchair, come in for the final type person.
Yeah, well, me too. But I gotta ask you before we get into the core of nuclear power here. Are Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer as cool as they seem to be?
I think so. I mean, the game changed dramatically over the years. So the access to players and the ability to get to know them as human beings diminished dramatically over the 20 years that I covered the sport. So it was much harder, really, to see who these, and I got to know people like Andre Agassi as a human being. I didn't get to know Rafa or Roger that way. So they came in pretty much right when I was leaving the sport. So
okay, I'm sorry to hear it.
Yeah,
but to me,
but I suspect so.
Yeah, they seem like really, really cool guys to me. So,
yeah.
Okay. But of course, I've always been a big Aaron Rodgers fan, and now we've had a reason to reevaluate that. And I don't think football was your beat. So let's get to your beat, which is the international situation with the atomic energy industry. The nuke industry took a huge hit, thankfully, on my birthday, which is December 31st. And count them, 3 reactors shut in Germany, and there are 3 left, and I assume they're going to, if I'm still around, they will be shutting on my next birthday, and Germany, the 4th largest economy in the world, will be nuclear free. Why don't you comment on that to your heart's content, Linda Pence Gunter, and tell us how significant you think that really is?
Well, thank you. It's actually my birthday today, so I guess we can have a double celebration. But
you look like you're about 25. Is that right?
Yeah, that's close enough. Flatterer. Anyway, yeah, Germany. I mean, what's fascinating is that Germany, in the light of this news, has been taking a beating in the press about its, by making this false comparison that because it's phasing out its nuclear plants, inevitably its fossil fuel output has gone up, its carbon emissions are not what they should be, the Energiewende, otherwise known as the German green energy revolution, is not on track. None of which is in fact true at all. And, there's this false correlation made between what's happening with coal in Germany and what's happening with nuclear in Germany. But in fact, renewables, even from 2010, have started and have succeeded in replacing the gap, such as it was, left by the shutdown of nuclear plants. And that's the big advantage that Germany has over, for example, France, which is, of course, extolled in the mainstream media as this wonderful flagship of the nuclear success, which is currently in a deep freeze with only 4 reactors closed for technical problems, and is looking at potential power cuts and brownouts because it cannot meet its electricity heat needs with nuclear alone, as in importing coal from Germany. So in reality, the German story is very much on track. They're going to meet their 80% renewable energy target by 2030. They're probably going to have closed all their coal plants 8 years sooner than planned, so not in 2038, but by 2030. And renewables have consistently filled any gap, not only left by the shutdown of nuclear power plants, but also by the reduced production of fossil fuels and aided by lower consumption by German electricity purchasers.
What is the? I mean, we've got a situation in this country where the former guy says anything he wants and tells all the lies he wants, and whatever. So what the nuclear industry's shills are running around saying that because of the closure of the nuclear plants in Germany, that Germany is now emitting more carbon than it did before. What is the truth behind the BS here?
The truth behind the BS is that Germany is a net exporter of electricity, and coal has become very profitable to export. So although Germany may be producing more fossil fuel at the moment than previously, it is for export purpose. It is not being consumed by the German consumer. It isn't changing the trajectory, which is the important thing to note, of carbon emissions and carbon footprint in Germany at all. It is not hampering the progress towards its 100% renewable economy by 2050. It's because there's demand. And one of the places where there's demand is nuclear France. So this great nuclear France, which is 70% of its electricity comes from nuclear power. France was mandated, everybody in France has to have electric heat. They're in a freeze at the moment. They've got 4 reactors down for technical problems. There's probably more of those to come. And so they're worrying about power cuts. And so they import electricity from Germany, fossil fuels from Germany. So nuclear France is actually impeding progress towards a zero carbon emissions economy, right? By being so dependent on an unreliable source of electricity and having been a monopoly on nuclear, stifled progress on renewable development. So they don't have anywhere to go. When they get into this situation, they don't have renewables to fall back on in France in any great number because they just didn't give renewables a chance to grow because it was all about nuclear for lots of reasons, mainly to do with nuclear weapons and the nuclear club. So that's the problem. Germany's going to be a success story. France is not. France cannot be a carbon-free economy by 2050 if it continues to use nuclear power, because you know as well as I do that that isn't a carbon-free energy source. So it's just a false narrative. It's very useful if you just sort of cherry pick, well, they're generating more fossil fuels in Germany and they're closing their nuclear plants. Ergo, one caused the other. No, they are completely unrelated. And in fact, this export of coal would have happened whether Germany had closed its nuclear plants or not, or whether to develop renewables or not. It's completely market driven. That's the only reason it's happening.
So let's stick with Germany for a minute, and then I want to go to France because that is really amazing what's happening there. And of course, it has implications for the US. But so the German transition to renewables, the renewable piece of it, how successful is that?
Well, I'm not deeply embedded in the ins and outs of what's happened in the last few years, because I know that the Merkel government has made it harder to bring on renewables as fast as they were going. So it has been impeded. It's by no means, 100% success story. But I think that the important thing to look at is always the trajectory. I mean, for example, if you look at the World Nuclear Industry Status Report, which comes out once a year and looks at the whole world, and you see the trajectory of nuclear power and you see the trajectory of renewables worldwide and looking at individual countries. And in Germany, as is the case in the world in general, the trajectory of nuclear energy is on a downward slope, and the trajectory of renewables is on a, not quite vertical, but, incredible.
Yeah.
Sort of meteorological rise. And so there's really no comparison between, this is sort of nuclear's last gasp, desperate to be in there somewhere, be relevant in some way, grab a share of the pot of money, as we've seen, what's happening in the European Union right now, where, we're poised to have both nuclear and natural gas, which luckily is called fossil gas there, more correctly, classified as, green energy, so they can grab a share of the financing to keep going. So, it's all about this sort of desperate hanging off the edge of the cliff financial catastrophe that nuclear power is, and trying to stay alive somehow and argue relevancy, which it has really none.
Wow. So Germany will go totally non-nuclear in 1 year or less.
This year. Yeah, 2022.
December 31st, 2022, when I turn 77, hopefully. My age has finally caught up to my IQ. So on December 31st this year, 22, Germany will have 0 nuclear plants, but their trajectory for going to renewables is on target at very least, primarily wind and solar, right?
Right.
And my understanding of the solar industry in Germany is that it really took off faster than most people assumed. The wind is basically primarily grid-based, but the incentives and the basic structure of the German energy economy, the Energiewende, encouraged a surprising leap to solar by many individual communities.
I think that's because of the feed-in tariff and because of grid priority.
Right.
So they were hugely incentivized. I mean, one of the things that struck me going through southern Germany, which is not the world's most progressive place, let's put it that way,
right.
Bavaria, is that you would pass through towns and you could not see a roof tile. Every roof was completely covered in solar panels. You didn't see roof tiles at all. Barns are covered in solar panels. I mean, they're making money, and that's what sold it to the Bavarian farmers. This was a profitable business to get into. And so it was attractive to people, obviously for some people for altruistic reasons and environmental reasons, but for many just because it made economic sense.
So Bavaria now has 2 major cash crops, solar-generated electricity and beer. Which is very good. But I was actually in the beer hall in 1967, traveling across Europe in the beer hall where Hitler made his putsch in Munich. And I have to say, it was the best beer I've ever had, and I don't drink. So there you go. So, so with energy, with wind and solar coming up, and Germany and Germany going off nuclear, and that the new prime minister is following Angela Merkel's footsteps, I assume he's going to be more aggressive than she was on renewables. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it looks like they're going to go for 80% renewables by 2030 and 0 coal by then as well.
Wow.
And, so I think, what struck me about Germany, and I remember this when when the Heinrich Böll Stiftung here had a series of politicians come over from Germany to talk, and they said, all political parties in Germany are anti-nuclear. It's basically political suicide in Germany to pro-nuclear. This sounds like a sort of fantasy dream to me. I can't even imagine that, But that's the case, that it's just, they're not going back. For all the Schellenbergers standing around in Munich Square railing on about how nuclear is good for everybody, it ain't going to change. There's no going back to nuclear in Germany. They're on the path. They're taking this criticism, but it's invalid. It's parsed information. It's not looking at the whole picture. And as I keep saying, well trained by Michael Schneider and his World Nuclear Industry Strategy Report, look at the trajectory. That's what matters. There may be some blips up and down along the way, but the trajectory for Germany and its Energiewende is success. Target met. That's what matters. Okay. And and it really rubs me the wrong way when the Washington Post and other US media start pointing the finger at Germany and don't look in the mirror, because our greenhouse gas emissions per capita in this country are twice as high as those of a German citizen. So we should probably look to our own first before we start complaining that, they're only going to phase out coal by 2038, because, we've got a lot to answer for in this country in terms of our carbon emissions.
Is that 2030 or 2038?
Well, the 2038 is the official target date, but everything that I'm seeing now is saying that it's inevitable that it'll be done by 2030.
Fantastic. All right, so now let's look at the French. France has, what, about 55 reactors. They are standardized design. I remember in the early days of the movement, anti-nuclear movement, everybody's saying, oh, we should standardize like France. So France, my understanding, has about all their reactors, I think except one or two, are Westinghouse design, pressurized water reactors. And it's about 50-50 in terms of size. I think one's a 14 or 13 and one's a 900 megawatt, right? So the question then is, they have developed, now they have admitted to serious cracking in 4 reactors at 2 sites. Now, the downside of standardization is if you have cracks in 2 reactors, you're likely to have cracks in 55 reactors. So tell us what's going on in France, please.
Well, I think there's been a long history of technical problems in France. I mean, although they haven't had a so-called major accidents, they have hundreds of incidents a year at their reactors. Whether this is related to the fact that they're all cookie cutter, I don't know. But it's obviously related to the fact that they're so dependent on this particular deeply flawed technology. But I think what's striking, is that there are 2 problems in France. One is the persistent problems they've discovered with the existing reactors. They, if you recall, they also had this scandal with the Le Creusot forge, which affects the new EPR reactors yet to be completed, but also raises questions about existing reactors in France and in the US that were supplied parts by the Le Creusot forge, which is part of the Areva family. So there are all sorts of reasons to be anxious about the safety situation in the existing reactors in France, but also in the one under construction in Flamanville, in Olkiluoto, and the 2 at Hinkley in the UK, which, as we know from what has now happened to the EPR that is running in Taishan, China, also has a flaw that is likely to be generic to the entire design. And what boggles my mind is that, regardless of this, these projects continue to forge ahead. It's as if, it's a bit like Don't Look Up, which I didn't love, but, the message in that film is, okay, we're just going to ignore what's coming right at us and just carry right on. And that's exactly what's happening with the French nuclear sector. Macron has come out and said, we're going to build 6 new EPR2s. I mean, the EPR is such a fiasco. It's probably like one of the biggest industrial flops ever from a technological point of view, from a cost point of view, from a deliverability point of view. And yet, unhesitatingly, with a straight face, he can announce that we're going to build more of these, yet a new improved design of an already disastrous catastrophe.
Is Flamanville, is that an EPR?
Flamanville is an EPR, right? Yep, that's the
Olkiluoto in
Olkiluoto 3, Flamanville 3C, which is 2 reactors. They're planning one for Sizewell in the UK, which will only ever happen, I think.
It'll never happen.
Well, I don't know. The willingness to give permission to these reactors and so look the other way on the obvious design flaws, not to mention the humongous cost. I mean, the only reason it's happening in England is they've established this sort of strike price, which is triple what consumers pay now. So EDF is of guaranteed revenue, but otherwise, no way.
I'm going to predict that none of those reactors get finished. I mean, look at Vogtle. Vogtle in Georgia. It was originally going to be $14 billion. It was going to open in 2017. 5 years after 2017, it's over $30 billion. And they're not even sure it'll open in 22, right?
Yeah, and look at all the sort of criminality that's associated with the U.S. reactor stories as well.
Now, the Vogtle reactors, are they? Those are Westinghouse as well?
Yeah, they're the AP1000, which is also another sort of disaster story. So,
well, they're all disasters. So the real question is, as far as I'm concerned, and everything going forward in this world, is China. What is China going to do? I mean, to my understanding is they've been debating a nuclear versus solar for the last few years, and the question is, clearly they're going to go ahead with solar. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, are they going to go ahead with their nuclear plants?
Well, China's does everything, so they're doing massive amounts of renewable, massive amounts of coal, massive amounts of nuclear, that they're kind of an all of the above delusion. That's what China is. But I think,
confirming Donald Trump's,
China,
I think that confirms Donald Trump's theory that Barack Obama was actually born in China. Sorry.
China. Okay, that's a new one. Anyway, I think that what frightens me about the China story is that this problem, this vibration problem that caused the leakage around the cladding on the fuel rods, that caused Taishan 1 and EPR to be closed down, was known about. A whistleblower has come forward and said that this was known about when it was at the Le Creusot Forge in 2007, 2008. It was then known about when they started the EPR up in 2018. So they just raised the level. They said, well, we'll just raise the level of leakage rate, but at which point the reactor should be shut down. So instead of saying, well, it's this rate, so we'll shut it now, they just sort of doubled it. So, okay, now it's at this rate. And then it exceeded that leakage rate. And so eventually in July 2021, they closed the reactor, but they knew about it possibly from when it started in 2018. Certainly it was detected in October 2020. And yet they ran it till July 2021. This is risking exposure to workers, to communities living around the plant. And they didn't shut Taishan 2, which is, of course, a twin to Taishan 1, to see if they have the same problem there, which they undoubtedly do. And it also suggests that that problem is probably present in Flamanville, in Olkiluoto, and in the Hinkley reactors. So it's this sort of carry right on, Jeeves, let's not let a major safety flaw impede our progress to saying it's open, it's running, we did it.
It's unbelievable. Then the other question is, we have Diablo Canyon in California, also Westinghouse PWRs, and they are, certainly Unit 1 is incredibly embrittled. And we have circulated a petition here in California 2 years ago, signed by Jane Fonda, and Martin Sheen and many others, only asking that the state inspect Unit 1 for embrittlement, and we can't even get them to do that. I mean, and I'm wondering, this cracking in France, might it translate to Diablo Canyon?
That's a question for an engineer. I'm not qualified to answer that. But I think that, all you can say is that these reactors are inherently dangerous from day one. And as we know, age-related degradation, which my friend jokes about knowing every time she gets out of bed in the morning, but age-related degradation.
I am very well aware of age-related degradation.
We know what age-related degradation is, and that's true for nuclear reactors as well. Obviously, the harsh environment in which they exist for all that time means that as they reach the end of their license life, and obviously should never be relicensed, are going to have embrittlement and degradation that could cause problems. So our position, obviously at Beyond Nuclear, is that they should be closed down ASAP. You don't need to look for the problem. You should just close the plant. It's not needed. Diablo Canyon, California is also on its trajectory, as you know, for a renewable economy because it planned well for it in advance. So the shutdown of San Onofre and Diablo Canyon is not going to affect that either. But
in our next half hour,
should be protected.
In our next half hour, Linda, you're welcome to stay with us. We're going to talk about the attempt in California to kill solar, which is and I'm sure it has counterparts all over the world, except in Germany, which is such an irony. Although Germany is not alone in Europe. My understanding is that Belgium, a number of other countries in the European Union, are following Germany's lead and heading towards a non-nuclear green future. What about that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that Belgium is on a green future, but it's certainly announced a non-nuclear future. I mean, the big battle right now in Europe is this issue of the taxonomy, which would allow nuclear power to call itself green and therefore get funding to continue. And this is what France is pushing for and what Germany's pushing back against, because as Germany's rightly saying, it's, apart from anything else, a dangerous technology. It's the problem here in the US where there's a huge push to put nuclear into sort of the Green New Deal, into the renewable energy portfolios in the various states, call it renewable, call it, clean energy, this sort of vague term that allows nuclear power to creep in the door. I mean, these things are shocking to me that you could just sort of reclassify nuclear as green energy or renewable. Just because you say it is does not make it green or renewable, So it's a bit like saying Obama was born in, wherever you said, like China. I mean, just because somebody says that doesn't make it true. And so it's not a renewable energy by any stretch of the imagination. And to just reclassify it is sort of typical, though, of what we see in the industry, in terms of Fukushima and the disaster there, and saying, well, now instead of saying 1 millisievert a year exposure is okay, we'll say 20 millisievert a year is okay because that's what's happened, so now that's safe. I mean, it's completely divorced from science or medicine. It's just convenient, right? And that's what we're up against constantly, is this sort of shifting the goalposts around to suit the profit motives and needs of an industry that's on its knees financially and has no role to play in climate change other than impeding progress by being a diversion of funds and time and expertise and so forth. So that's, I think, at the heart of the battle we face right now, as we fight for our survival under climate crisis, is to keep things like nuclear, which are going to slow down any efforts to ameliorate our conditions, dramatically and potentially fatally.
Unbelievable. Let's jump to the last punctuation mark on this, which is this idiocy about small reactors. We had a column in the LA Times today by Michael Hitzik, who's very, very smart, about this. And in Los Angeles, about 20 miles north of me, in the valley, there was a horrible accident in the 50s at Santa Susana. And it was a sodium-cooled reactor and pretty much the same technology that they're now telling us is brand new with small reactors. Right. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, I was shocked when I read an article in the Washington Post where they can describe nuclear as modern. I thought, no.
Yeah, right.
The one thing it isn't is modern. Renewables are modern. Nuclear is not modern. It's an old technology. I mean, you're right. The small modular reactor is not a new idea. It's been around for decades and rejected for decades for very valid reasons. I mean, I think if you read, Ed Lyman's analysis that he did at Union of Concerned Scientists on all these various designs that are being touted, whether they are small is debatable because some of them are not that small. For example, the Rolls-Royce small modular reactor in the UK is 450 megawatts, not that small. But nevertheless, whether they're fast reactors, small reactors, the implications for safety are completely unsatisfied. No one really knows. They haven't answered the fundamental safety questions. They're still on paper. They're kind of jokingly referred to as PowerPoint reactors because that's where they are. And yet there's all this publicity about something that isn't even needed, let alone proven to be effective, of course, cannot come on in great enough numbers in time to make any difference at all to climate change, even if they were to come to life. And so it's this curious sort of clutching on to phantoms when right in front of us, we have the answers, starting with conservation, energy efficiency, and bringing on renewables in significant numbers, can do what we need to do. And to sort of cling on to this idea of, clean coal or safe nuclear, whatever, is a waste of time and money that we don't have. And that's what's so frustrating about it. And it's to do with lobbying power. It's to do with traditional kind of, you shake my hand, I'll shake yours on Capitol Hill. It's not grounded in the reality of empirical evidence, as far as I can tell.
No, not at all. And it's what it's grounded in is the indomitable desire of the fossil nuclear industry to proliferate itself into the future. And I think the tipping point will come when the renewable energy industry is worth more and has more dollars to spend on Congress than the nuclear and coal industries have.
But that's terrible that it should, come down to bribes. I mean, surely, I'll buy out now because I'm not the expert on this, but my understanding is the renewable energy sector is the fastest growing employer in the United States, bar none, right? So, that should count for a lot.
Yes.
That should count for something. It should count for a lot of things because the thing you always hear is about jobs, 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 So renewables not only wins on everything else, but also on jobs. And that doesn't seem to get nearly enough play. But I'll let you talk to your
yes, this is our guy, TATONKA BRICCA. I don't know if you know Linda Gunter. You two should be in touch. TATONKA is our California guy. TATONKA, I'm not hearing you. You're muted. You gotta speak up. And I see you in your car, but it's not moving. Thank God. That's the one rule I have on my Zoom calls. You can talk from a car, but it can't be moving.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we got you.
Okay. I thought I had done
TATONKA BRICCA in the Santa Cruz area. This is Linda Gunter from Beyond Nuclear in Washington, D.C. area. And Linda is one of the leading experts in the world on international nuclear power. And we've been talking about especially the phase out of nuclear in Germany and the problems with the Westinghouse reactor designs in France, of which Diablo Canyon is akin. And these problems in France now have just surfaced. We don't know how serious they really are, but they're certainly serious enough to have caused the French to shut 4 reactors, which is a big deal. And this will have tangible impacts on their ability to meet energy demand in France. And the great irony is, because the French industry is so lousy, these 55 Westinghouse reactors that are always shutting down, and that may be in danger of an entire, it is not inconceivable that these cracks that have developed or have been discovered, I'm sure they've been there a long time, in the 4 reactors in France will force France to shut all their reactors, because the French designs are generic. And, to repeat, as for years, the industry has been saying we should be like France, we should have standardized designs. Small problem, when you have a problem in one design, one actual reactor, it could impact all the reactors in France. And that includes Diablo Canyon, which is apparently not in France, but the same design. So Linda and TATONKA, you need to be in touch with each other. Linda is quite brilliant and has enlightened us on much of what's going on. And we also have to remember, since everything seems to begin and end in California, that the standardized design that they're pushing for small modular reactors, its predecessor, its ancestor, actually blew up at Santa Susana north of LA and caused perhaps the worst radioactive reactor-related disaster in American history. Is that a fair assessment, Linda, of the radiation that was spewed out at Santa Susana?
Certainly sounds like it. Again, that's not something I'm qualified to make comparison on. I think also because we don't really know, for example, with 3 Mile Island, how much radiation got out.
Exactly, yes.
Shut the radiation monitors off. There was all sorts of suppression of information. There were no proper epidemiological studies done, and so forth. There are probably all sorts of situations like this that we are still coming to light that we knew nothing about. There's a good story now about all the radioactive contamination of drinking water in the US from places like Santa Susana and elsewhere. So I think it's an ongoing, unfolding story, but it's a lesson that, when you dig this stuff out of the ground, as the Native Americans warned us, you leave it in the ground, you do not touch the yellow dust. And unfortunately, we dug it up, and now we're reaping the rewards, so to speak. But I'm sorry that I do actually have to move.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I will point out, thank you, and I will point out I was one of 2 reporters that was stupid enough to go into the 3 Mile Island area after the accident, and all the worst fantasies, all the worst nightmares that you can imagine definitely happened there. And you're definitely right. We do not know how much radiation was released there. I will leave you with one last thought. There has been a horrifying wave of deaths among racehorses at the Santa Anita Park, which is right downwind from Santa Susana. And at some point, somebody's going to come out with a comparison. Thank you so much, Linda. We really appreciate it. And congratulations on your birthday turning 27. We're very happy for you.
1 year more. Okay.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, TATONKA. Bye-bye.
Take care, Linda. Okay, we're now going to go to the great TATONKA BRICCA, sitting in his car. We're waiting for Ron Leonard. He may have his time wrong.
I want to say, sitting in and listening, I wish I'd been able to get on earlier, but I couldn't, because I I could have learned about the new nuclear generation that she probably knows much more about. But
the bottom line is that the so-called small reactors that they're wanting to bring online are basically the same design that blew up at Santa Susana.
That much I know. That much I know. And that's all we need to know, really.
Really.
And you know, I just saw, you seen the movie Idiocracy?
No.
Okay. Well, you need to see it. It's kind of the precursor to Don't Look Up, the DiCaprio thing now, which we're going to do a collective Zoom experience on Friday. It's a DiCaprio thing. Anyway.
Well, wait, do you have a link for that? Can you tell us?
I can get it to you.
Okay.
But I feel like sitting in this conversation, I feel like a Rip Van Winkle moment where what we knew in the early 70s, I've woken up, it's 50 years later, it's the same friggin' conversation. And there's no responsibility at all by the nuclear industry to what's going on. There never has been.
No, and the thing, as fellow Californians here, is that we need to understand that the Diablo Canyon is of a piece with the French reactors. And
yes.
If these 4 reactors, this is 4 reactors, they are going to have serious supply problems this winter in France because these 4 reactors have gone down. And if this cracking proves generic, all the Westinghouse reactors in the world, which include the 2 at San Luis Obispo, that is a threat to their continued operation.
Oh man, you're right. And you know, in earlier discussion about the cost of energy, it's really interesting. Of course, we have solutions, and of course, they're cheaper. And of course, the response of the nuclear industry now is to tax us for putting solar on a roof, for doing the right thing, for being economical and responsible.
All right, so let's talk about that now. In California, we are facing a horrific assault on solar energy. At the same time, we're trying to solarize the state. So we've got one group over here, the fossil nuclear people, trying to drive solar out of business. At the same time, we're trying to solarize the state. So can you tell us, Tatonka, what exactly, and I want to explain that Christopher Bricca Tatonka works with the indigenous here in California, around the country, actually, with Danny Sheehan at the Romero Institute and Sarah Nelson, and totally integrated into the attempt to transition our economy, especially in California, to a green renewable base. And we, uncharacteristic of movements on the left, we have the economy on our side. There is absolutely no doubt that greening California with solar and wind will completely drop the price of energy, create thousands and thousands of jobs, and fight global climate chaos at the same time. But now they're coming at us to try and kill the rooftop solar business. Can you tell us what's going on with this, Christopher?
Well, I think it's, at the same time, you have the wealthy corporations out of Davos with the Great Reset making the move with the oil corporations to control the pace and timing of renewable. So they'd be very happy with Biden's 30-year plan, right? Let's get another 30 years to drag the oil out of the ground before we get to carbon neutral. Well, in California and in many parts of the country, you have a choice now of either owning the solar on your roof or basically selling it to a solar company and renting it. In either case, you can get basically free energy from the sun. You can, when you utilize all the energy you need for decades now in California, you can sell it back to the grid. It will go and produce more renewable energy in the state for everyone. It's a totally rational solution and it works economically. So now what they're doing is they're basically trying to hold on to their advantage. They don't want decentralized. They really don't want small d democracy to flourish and for people to make energy decisions at the level of their own home and their own local community. They want to create the large farm size things so that it can be a continued utility that they can own and then charge us whatever they want.
And how exactly are they discouraging rooftop solar? What are they doing now to kill the industry?
Well, basically, if you have solar now, it's essentially going to be a tax to mitigate all the energy, the excess energy that you then sell back to the grid, which brings the cost way down and makes it even zero cost or profitable for you. So that's their first step, to stop making it profitable and to stop making it any out of pocket cost. And it will discourage a lot of people from making the decision, which is the goal. There's a PUC, Public Utilities Commission meeting relatively soon. I'll have to find the date again. I think we have a week or two to lobby on it. And the Solar Alliance in California, which has over 100,000 members, is very active with that. So that's something we need to take action on. And I'm basically going to be sending an email out later today with that information.
So the rooftop solar in California, my son-in-law has it on his roof. I've been waiting for personal financial reasons to do it in our home. And I also am hoping, when I put solar on my roof here, to be able to have a plug-in for an electric car, or at least for an electric hybrid. And because my daughter, I have a 2010 Toyota, which is actually a really good car. And it gets almost 30 miles to the gallon. She filled the tank, which is only 11 or 12 gallons, the other day, and it was over $50.
Yep.
So we're in, and I don't drive that much, but still, we're in the ballpark now where it really makes sense, especially now if I can get a plug-in on my solar roof.
Yes.
But the solar rooftop is being held back. There, of course, been all sorts of uproars in the photovoltaic industry, to the physical industry, and I want to talk about that with you in a minute. But my understanding of what the fossil nuclear industry is trying to do in California, and they've gotten play at the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, which is about as corrupt an organization as you'll find anywhere.
Total corporate capture by industry.
Completely, and it's outrageous. And so what they want to do now is put a tax on solar panels on rooftops, and mess with the feed-in, the net metering operation.
Yes.
Can you give us some detail on that?
Well, I know as much as you do about that. This is not my specialty. I sold solar in the 70s, and I created a solar coalition. And about 15 years ago, I sold solar again with the photovoltaic. But the price cost has come down significantly. The rebates have almost disappeared that used to be higher. That's another thing. I mean, the state of California, the federal government could be continuing to give rebates. They're kind of discouraging all this. So the political power we need, without the progressives taking over the Democratic Party in the next couple of years, I don't see a way out of this, because you're right. We need the money on our side to get some things done. And the only way to do that, the moderate part of the old traditional wing of the Democratic Party that went corporate around the Clinton time to try to create Republican light, and just keeps, giving things away a la Manchin and Sinema, that will lead us right into Trump and right into our own demise in a very, very short time. So this election in California coming up is critical. And part of that is us getting a Let's Green California bill to electrify the whole state. It's the first of a 3-bill part, 2022, 2023, 2024, which will cover every significant 13 different sectors, including agriculture, including water, including state bank down to the local level, et cetera. But the first one will take care of 1/3 of all the carbon put in the atmosphere with that will be mitigated by electrifying automobiles, light trucks, homes, and businesses. And then it'll go the following year. But that itself will require us to target swing districts that have Democrats in them that are siding with industry. And so there's some of these swing districts who are going to have to run progressives. We're talking right away. All that is in play.
We thought
this works together with the Georgia Way strategy, where we're using grassroots organizing to build up the strength of numbers, people speaking for local energy, people speaking for the right to vote.
Well, we're going to have you on the Zoom call on Monday, Tatonka, to talk about that. If this country is going to survive, we are going to have to do two things. First, we're going to have to prevent the Bannon fascist movement from taking over the local election boards.
Right.
Because they have been very clear on their strategy of putting people with guns, essentially, into local election boards to turn the whole country into the pre-1960 South.
Yes.
And there's not much doubt about that. The second part is to organize the kinds of strategies that you're talking about here at the grassroots to get progressive candidates.
The interesting thing on number one that you just talked about, we learned last night on our Circle of 100 meeting, where we had Danny Sheehan, Dolores Huerta, Ben Eichert speak, but also we had Lori Pesante, who's the legislative person who works full-time with Dolores Huerta. And they have the new printout of the new districts created, the redistricting created by the census. And the work that the Dolores Huerta Foundation did in the Central Valley has resulted in something historic. 4 congressional districts in the San Joaquin Valley up to the Sacramento Valley. There's only been one that has really been abiding by the majority of the wishes of the people. That's more progressive. The result of their work is 3 out of the 4 now are going to go our way. But what that took was not only grassroots organizing at the local and regional level, it took them being involved at the state level. And I heard a story of how they faced off on the redistricting issue against the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys, and stood up to a massive amount of threat of violence pressure, the same kind of thing that we're going to be facing at the polling booths in the coming elections that's being orchestrated by Bannon and Trump will be pushing. So we've already seen an example of they were totally pleasantly surprised that their work at the state resulted in the state making the right decision. So anyway, those issues are directly related.
Right, and we will talk about that in our next GREEP call on Monday, which will be broadcast next week at PRN in this slot. So people following the grassroots attempt to protect our elections, you can join us Monday. Email me directly, solartopia@gmail.com, and I'll give you the link, or that you will hear it, at least an hour of it a week from today.
And for everybody who hasn't been on the call that Sluggo has organized, show up. I mean, magic happens there. Just by attending, people have met that didn't know each other, and new amazing things have come out of it.
And then things that are going to determine the fate of our country, because for all the talk about this and that and the indictments and so on and so forth, on January 6th, which is today, by the way, what it's all going to boil down to is who controls the election boards. And will they be small d Democratic, or will they be capital F fascist? And that's really what we're looking at here. Now, in terms of energy, you are pushing a Green New Deal here, a Green California plan, and we have exactly 7 minutes to get through it. But tell us what it is, please.
Well, the bill that is going to be coming out, that we will have a sponsor of within, say, 3 or 4 weeks, and completion of the bill, the writing of the bill itself, will be called, it's coming out of Let's Green California, which is our campaign. And the bill is called Electrify California. And this will despite that, even the incumbent Democrats having this tunnel vision where they say, oh, we can't have a bill that has both cars and trucks in the same bill. Oh, we can't have a bill that has both commercial and residential buildings. We've been fighting that, and we have a lot of support in the state legislature kind of behind the scenes for this. So this will be one of several bills that is introduced by the greater environmental community. Ours is particularly distinct because our coalition does not buy into the labor, organized labor especially, versus environment. We have SEIU, IBEW, we have a lot of local and statewide union people in our coalition, along with different environmental groups, having them understand that one of the reasons why nothing has gotten through the state of California is that the building trades have basically shut down a lot of good proposals. But that's because there's historically, the environmental groups haven't been working with labor. They say, well, that's just your problem if we electrify and it affects their jobs. And so they've taken a stance, and it's resulted in some unfortunate competition. Okay. So this one will result in about 33% of all the carbon put up through the home use, the building use, the automobile use, the truck use. That's the first bill, and that will be called Electrify California. It doesn't have a number yet, but within, by mid-February at the latest, but probably by the beginning of February, we will have a bill number, and we will have a series of sponsors for that. Then that's going to be followed by another bill in 23 and another bill in 24. And our design that we've been working on now for a year and a half is designed for California to create the model that the nation can use, meaning that we need to get the carbon down, and not just the carbon, the methane and all the short-lived gases that are far more deleterious in the short term, to get them pulled down and to reach carbon neutrality and draw down within 10 years, not 30 years, 10 years, or else we're facing 43-foot sea rise around the world in the next generation, before 2050, well before 2050.
We're talking with TATONKA BRICCA, Christopher, one of the great organizers based in California on renewables and on election protection. TATONKA, I would like to do a segment with you, of course, on Monday. If you have people who have been directly threatened and have had experience with these fascists, the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys and these other abandoned Nazis, I would like to have them come on. We have someone who's been physically confronted, threatened in North Carolina, but she's not talking. So if anybody has had direct experience, I want them on the call Monday.
I'll have a conversation and see if we can arrange that.
Okay, that would be great. So in this show, we have covered, an incredible gamut. The Germans, of all people, fourth largest economy in the world, shut 3 reactors on December 31st, my 76th birthday, and on my 77th, if I'm still around, they will shut the last 3, which means that the 4th largest economy in the world will be 100% post-nuclear. And they're, as we learned from Linda Gunter, their transition to renewables is really ahead of schedule and under budget, as we say. And
ask you a question: Do they have a plan for funding the decommissioning of those plants in Germany?
That is a question I can't answer, and
okay.
We will. I would assume, being German, I would assume they do. So,
yeah. No, they're so. I mean, when I first went, I was the first organizer for Amnesty International in the United States, along with Joan Baez and Janetta Sagan and the Sally Lilienthal and a bunch of others. But as we traveled around, and I went to the International Amnesty Conference in Germany, and oh my God, they were by far, along with the Dutch, they were by far the best organized. I mean, we learned so much from them.
Yes, and of course, the opposite has been the marijuana campaigns in America, where everybody's too stoned to gather signatures, but we still got through it. So at any rate, France is looking at major catastrophe in their nuclear industry. And meanwhile, they're pushing a small reactor design that is proven to blow up and caused the worst radiation release in American history. And here we have Tatonka with us with a plan, the Romero Institute, Dolores Huerta, and all that, to solarize California, from which all good things will happen. Tatonka, great to have you on. Please do. We will talk. I do want you on Monday to discuss this plan going forth in California to democratize our democracy. Let's put it that way, and to somehow turn the Democratic Party into a small d operation, take it back from Wall Street, to whom the Clintons sold it in the mid-90s.
Well, thank you for your commitment, and thank you for your new book.
Oh,
buy the book.
My People's Spiral of U.S. History. Thank you, Tatonka. I will have it out by February 1st, hopefully even sooner, after a mere 50 years. So listen, this has been thank you, the crew in New York. This has been another edition of the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show. We have talked with Linda Pence Gunter of Beyond Nuclear and Tatonka Bricca. What's your official organization when I talk to you? Are you Romero Institute or?
Well, actually, I'm the Experiment Circle of 100, which is a total volunteer organization. It's Danny Sheehan's experiment to see if a group of well-meaning volunteer citizens and indeed can help change the world. None of us are paid. Romero has the paid people. We just do research. We do whatever's needed. And we're going to be teaming up to do grassroots organizing, go all over the state where needed.
And how do people get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me with my phone number, and my email is the best way. My email is cbricca, BRICCA, @me.com. My phone number is 415-570-3219.
Okay, and anybody needs to contact me, solartopia@gmail.com. Thank you, crew in New York. Thank you, Tatonka. And we will be back on with you next week with a full report from the Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition. And until then, we will see you in Solartopia.
Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got